Welcome to the presentation for week 2 on motivation. Thank you very much for all your efforts on the week 1. I've got a lot of very good feedback on leadership. I want you to interact more. This class for some reason is not doing a lot of stuff on the introduction forums and the like, but as you read each other's posts, try to get the flavor. There's some students that you might sync with, that you might feel a connection with, and I'd like to see some more comments on that. The posts are designed to get you to interact. But after leadership theory, we're going to look at a little more scholarly look at motivation. That's the topic of this show.
It's campaign season here in the United States, and it kind of brought to mind the readings on chapter 6 of Phillips about what Lincoln went through as he was, let's see, in his political life. He was called some of the nastiest things, much nastier, I think, than what today's politicians have. And it was all in a very charged environment, I think arguably more charged than what we have today. But what did Lincoln do about it? Did he fight back? Did he punch people? Did he get, to be called a grotesque baboon, to be called an ape, a dishonest politician, okay, that's sort of whatever. That's run of the mill. But what did he do? He ignored it. He got tough, used it to motivate, channeled the energy in a positive way. He quietly wrote letters, but then never sent them. Maybe kept a diary, maybe. He also stuck to his position. He didn't back down. Doesn't mean he attacked. He didn't attack the other person, but on issues of substance, he wouldn't compromise. He would tell the truth in humorous stories, try to do, sort of like disarm the opposition, and above all, he made actions that he thought were ethical. And history has shown him to be much more memorable. We know Lincoln. I don't know much of any of these other people who were insulting him. And regardless, it worked. One of the lessons I draw from Lincoln's experience is that he shows emotional intelligence. He is able to control his emotions. He is able to understand and the emotions in himself and others. This concept is called emotional intelligence. I think it's important for leaders to have this capability. And just a little bit about what it is, because there are different people who look at emotional intelligence in different ways. Emotional intelligence is the ability to regulate and understand emotion. So let's look at 5 parts. 5 parts of it, this is from another source, but it makes sense. Not McShane and Von Glino. Let's see, self-awareness. So, how many people do you know act out of some passion, out of some anger that they may have that they're not even aware of? I think a lot of us do, and to that extent you are not self-aware. Self-awareness would be understanding the sources of your emotion, the sources of your own angers, joys, and whatever. Self-regulation. Self-regulation refers to the ability to be professional, to control your emotions. Let's say to work in a professional way and an effective way with somebody you really despise. That would show self-regulation. Motivation. If you control your emotions, you'll be able to channel them into the work that you think is important. Motivation. Empathy. Emotional intelligence is understanding your own emotions, but also understanding other people's emotions. And other people's emotions are, we pick up from cues and by also maybe reflecting on how we would feel in that other person's position. Social skills. Not so much social skills that we learn cognitively, like how to set a placemat or something, but rather social skills where in a very complex and charged situation we are able to handle events unforeseen events with tact, saying the right thing, setting the right tone, social skills. And lastly, relationship management. Relationship management, and we'll get into this next week, talking about interpersonal relationships and trust. But certainly, relationship management in the sense that, in the context of a relationship, we can stretch the relationship, say things that might be offensive to others but not to this person, or be sensitive to the unique needs of others, and generate a sense of trust, a sense of comfort, a sense of positive professional relation and working environment. A couple of other things from the readings from Kuzitz and Posner, chapter 10, Truth 10, leadership is an affair of the heart. That relates to, I think, emotional intelligence. It relates to motivation. Not a job you do for money, but a life calling. Well, in today's world, managers and leaders are not necessarily simply technicians. You're dealing with people, and we need to get more out of people than simply some sort of heartless or technical management philosophy. Rather, it's got to be something that you love, and I'm going to get to that in the next slide. Similarly, Lincoln greatly valued honesty and integrity. I think honesty and integrity really turned him on. Uh, it made him love what he did and be proud of what he did. Trust, honesty, and integrity are exceedingly important because they so strongly affect followers. That's a huge clue coming into motivation, which is the topic of this entire show. But the point here is that leaders have to figure out how to turn on, how to get strong emotions and channel the efforts of followers appropriately. There's a negative side too, and I was kind of like interested in this aspect that Lincoln shunned dishonest folk. Can you do that? I wonder how many of us, I have a hard time doing it. If I'm working with somebody and I find somebody's dishonest, I tend to just gloss over it and move on. Lincoln kind of shunned them, insulted them, took them out of his presence. I got to think about how effective that is. But in a way, it sort of reinforced what Lincoln stood for. It sent a lot of good signals, even if it didn't. It really hurt the relationship with the dishonest person. Let's look at these 6 human capabilities drawn from Hamill's classic 2007 book, The Future of Management. These are 6 human capabilities, and I want you to think about how as a leader you get a higher level of functioning from your followers. The lowest level is obedience. You get people to do what you ask them to do, and only what you ask them to do. Diligence. Your followers will do what you ask them to do, and maybe fill in some of the spaces and do what you mean for them to do, in addition to what you literally ask them to do. Higher intelligence. You bring some very skilled top problem solving or technological capabilities to the work. Now, these three lower ones are basic. Now, you may be getting an MBA in order to get some knowledge and to understand some how organizations are managed or to get some financial skills. That's intelligence. It's still lower on the list. And I want to warn you about focusing on intelligence because intelligence is becoming a commodity in many senses. Fine, there's high level intelligence, people very, very smart. But these higher level capabilities are what are going to set you apart from others in the workforce. Initiative. Initiative means you you understand the organization has a problem. You don't wait for someone to talk about it. You don't wait for others to do. You go ahead and address it on your own. Very valuable, and this will make you a more effective manager. Higher than that, creativity. In order to solve some of the very complex problems that face businesses in the world today, you need to think in a way that no one else has thought before. You need to bring new combinations of resources. You need to time things in a way that no one has done before. That's creativity. Creativity is hugely important, more important, I would argue, than initiative. Highest level, though, passion. Passion means it subsumes all the rest, all the creativity, initiative, intelligence. But passion means that no matter how hard it gets, no matter how much of a challenge you have in your work or whatever, you don't give up. Passion implies persistence. It's a major differentiator between entrepreneurs, for example, who are able to establish successful organizations, corporations, and entrepreneurs who fail. And the same thing with all levels of management. How much passion can you bring and sustain into your work? You almost identify with the work. You are positive about your work and you put every energy, every ounce of mental energy you can into it. The highest level, passion. Now, here's a problem of leadership, especially in the United States. How does a leader inspire followers, and especially inspire followers to become passionate? A lot of the old theories of leadership, like a military theory of leadership, where you simply train and condition soldiers to automatically follow what the higher ranking officer says. That model is not going to work in competitive economies. Firms need to get the best out of their people, and even intelligent people. They're available worldwide at a very low cost, and you don't, if you're an accountant or if you have some skill, you don't want to compete with the Filipinos, you don't want to compete with the Indians or Chinese on that skill. Rather, you want to go to the more difficult to outsource skills or capabilities, the initiative, creativity, and passion ones. So, for a US firm, you need passion, and how do you engender that passion? I'm using this slide to frame the question of motivation. Motivation is not simply getting workers to do what you want them to do and getting workers to not steal or otherwise hurt your company. What motivation therefore is about is how to get followers to be passionate. So when thinking about how to get passion from your followers, let's the context is a cognitive one. Let's go with the theory. It's the forces within a person that affect the direction, intensity, and persistence of voluntary behavior. That's motivation. And so we have some theories, and I'm going to present a few of them that explain why followers exert themselves. The first is three needs theory, and we're going to do a self-assessment on this one, so you'll see what kind of needs drive you. But it's a little more complicated. Let me try to explain it. There are three learned needs, and the word learned is very important. And other some of the I think even the self-assessment looks at four or five, but they're different. There's a few primal needs that we all have. And these needs, when they are not met, motivate us because we want to work to meet our needs. That's our natural drive. Let's look at the three from the three needs theory. One is affiliation. We have a need to we are social animals and we need to have the relationships, perhaps approval, social approval, but perhaps certainly close relationships with others. We don't want to be alone. The need for achievement. We have a need to have accomplishments in our lives. And three is a need for power. There is a certain people have a drive to be more powerful, to have more status, to have more, have an ability, a legitimate ability to control the behaviors of others. Now, the needs are learned and determined by the gap between actual level and desired level. So, if you have a high need for power and then get promoted, your gap will decrease. So, let's look at if you have a position in your organization now that has a low level of power. You don't have control over a lot of resources in the organization. You can't really control the actions and behaviors of others. You might have a need for power that is higher than your actual level for power. So you may, and that will drive you. That gap between your need for power and actual level of power means you might do whatever it takes to get a promotion to a more powerful position. Once you get that more powerful position, you'll be able to have more control over resources, more control over others' behaviors, and your need for power might be more satisfied. And the gap will decrease. Now, you will have a lower need for power because your actual level of power will match your need. So you're not motivated as much by power. Likewise with achievement and likewise with affiliation. Now, the needs are learned, which means the desired level can change. So maybe in 2 years, you might learn, you might develop, say, hey, I am a supervisor level and I want to be a general manager level. So I want that extra power. Well, in a couple of years, that desire might arouse and your need, therefore, would be higher than your actual level. And therefore, that need for power will motivate you to do what it takes to get that next promotion. Now, the three needs theory, it makes sense and it explains a couple of things why in the military and in many large organizations, your career advancement generally goes in 2 to 3 year increments. After 2 to 3 years, it takes 2 to 3 years to learn a need to get a higher level so it's a motivator. And at that stage, you can get promoted provided you show enough accomplishment, motivation, and there's a room for you and so forth. Motivator hygiene theory, Hertzberg's theory, basically shows that there's a difference between satisficers or things that satisfy us in the workplace and things that dissatisfy us in the workplace. The motivation comes from the sources of satisfaction. And the sources of dissatisfaction do not motivate us. They may encourage us to leave a company, so they're important, but they're not necessarily motivators. And let me explain in the next slide how that works. Hygiene factors cause dissatisfaction. So dissatisfaction can result from insufficient salary, you're not happy with your salary. You're not happy with your working conditions. You're not happy with your coworkers. These are called the hygiene or the external factors of the work. Now, these can cause turnovers, but may not impact motivation. So let me explain that a little bit. If you increase someone's salary, you will make them less dissatisfied. They'll be happier, but you won't necessarily motivate them to work harder. I'll get back to that. There's also, I mentioned, a recession effect. Hygiene factors are affected by things like a recession, and the recession, during recessions, managers generally don't get paid much more. The working conditions don't get any better. As a matter of fact, a lot of their colleagues get fired because companies are downsizing. And even though the managers don't get a higher salary, they work harder. So in a recession, everybody's complaining, everybody's grumpy, but and dissatisfied, but they're still motivated to work harder. Recessions sort of bring out the real difference between satisfaction and dissatisfaction. And so the challenge of the work can motivate people to work harder even though they're very dissatisfied with working conditions. Now, the next bullet. Motivator factors can cause satisfaction, such as the work itself, achievement, and accomplishment. These are the things that cause motivation. So if you want somebody to work harder, you might give that person more work or more challenging work, and give them a chance to develop a record of real accomplishment and skills that can enable them to do even more complex, more sophisticated, more leadership work, and so forth. Now, what firms normally do, and as a result of the motivator hygiene, it sort of explains why when people get raises, they also get more work. They are given more responsibilities, given more challenging positions, more challenging work to do. That's what a promotion is. So raises in salary often come along with raises in expectations, and these these two things go together. It makes sense from the company's perspective. If you just raise people's salaries, they're not going to automatically work harder. They'll be less dissatisfied, but they won't necessarily be motivated. So to match the decrease in dissatisfaction, the higher salary, the with the increase demands or different opportunities for achievement and therefore motivation. Many of us have worked in our careers, especially early in our careers, where we take jobs that don't pay us much money, but still we work very hard at them. And one way to explain this particular idea of motivation is the expectancy theory of motivation. It's a motivation theory says that we will work hard because eventually we'll get very, very good outcomes. While we're working in this entry-level management position or this low-level position, we are developing the skills, the relationships, the reputation, the accomplishments that will be a foundation for future positions that will be much better. So the as long as followers think or see that their efforts are linked to performance, in other words, if you work hard, you're going to get good performance reviews, your good performance evaluations. And so consistent with this theory, entry-level managers will work on, an important client, or work on a project that will change the companies. They will not work on, or they should not work on, according to this theory, something like sweeping the floors, or doing copies, or getting coffee for people, or even planning the Christmas party. Those are very time consuming jobs, but they're not going to lead to good performance evaluations. Next step in expectancy theory is performance to valence. Performance to valence means that the accomplishments that you do as a result of your achievement are accomplishments that you feel good about. Or a good way to put this is what you're doing is learning how to make the world a better place. So, suppose you're working for the oil industry. You may be developing very good skills and helping to get gasoline out to people, and you're very proud of that because you're helping the transportation infrastructure and helping improve people's quality of life through your efforts. That would be a good performance to valence perspective. Other people may work for an oil company and at some point become an environmentalist, or see that global warming or climate change, which is linked to the oil industry activities, might be a very negative part. So you would look at your lifetime of accomplishment and say, oh no, I'm not really proud of that. Once that performance to valence link is sort of like broken according to expectancy theory, then motivation is affected. And there are a lot of examples to this where you may think that you're learning a lot of very good skills, but then you may later on frame those skills. Like, I learned how to manage people, but then you might think, but I managed them in a way that wasn't in their self-interest or didn't make them better people. I mean, I can see that that would be a possibility. Within the expectancy theory of motivation, as in all these, look at the role of a leader. In the expectancy theory of motivation, motivation is assumed to be inherent in all of us, as long as the leader makes clear these links that a leader can tell a worker, a follower, hey, if you do these things, you will get good performance reviews. That performance reviews will lead to this particular career path. And as long as a leader makes that clear, then followers will tend to be very self-motivated, and there isn't much else the leader has to do. And the activities of a leader in expectancy theory are consistent with the servant leadership perspective. Equity theory sort of assumes that as people we are competing with others, and we're motivated to the extent that we're ahead, and that our prospects are likely to keep us ahead, and I put ahead in quotation marks, of others. So let's look at the outputs and inputs, which are the basis of the theory. When in any job you're going to get outputs. Outputs are things like salary, but also things like status, like vacation time, like perks, bonuses, quality of work, everything about a job that you get from it. Those are the outputs of a job. You might want to look at outputs as how good a deal it is. Inputs largely are effort, but also inputs are what you put into the job, which include your effort, but also include your skills and experiences and capabilities, your knowledge, skills, and abilities. Now, the ratio of outputs to inputs sort of like is a measure of, and it's an impossible to measure ratio, but it's a ratio that indicates how good of a job it is. Now, outputs to inputs might work like this. If I'm a professor and I have a PhD, my capabilities are at a certain level. And then I look at my outputs, my salary, my summer bonuses, my research grants, my everything. So what I so I make a certain salary. Now suppose there's a colleague who's similar to me in terms of experience and training and capability, but makes a salary that's 20% higher, even though we have the same inputs. I am going to perceive an inequitable situation. Okay, so if my colleague would be my referent, I'm myself, and I would say, well, I'm not getting as good a deal as someone else, so I'm discouraged. And I might do a number of things. I might complain, I might advocate, but another thing I could do is I could just reduce my effort. If someone else is getting 20% higher salary than me, and there aren't and everything else is comparable, then I could just put 20% less effort in. And then I can say to myself, hey, now we're equal. And I want to be equal with everyone else. That's how equity theory works. Now, I can change my perceptions in a number of ways. I can say that rather than compare myself with this colleague in this other department, I should compare myself with maybe my friend who works in another industry. In that other industry, that my friend works much harder than I do and maybe does much more demanding work and gets a lower salary. Well, compared to that person, I'm like getting a really super deal. And again, we have an an unequitable situation. And I'm going to say, well, geez, if I'm making so much more, then to be fair relative to him, I should work harder. So equity theory can get a different result based on what reference you use. It can also get a different result based on other resources. Some people will work very hard. They will really value something like having a corner office or having a secretary or having lots of country club memberships or other things that will make a perceive that the outputs are greater. Now, there's a link between equity theory and a concept called distributive justice. Distributive justice means that it's just the way we distribute the salaries across people. So, distributive justice comes into play with discrimination, pay discrimination lawsuits or pay discrimination law, but also as a concept. If you have two people doing the same job, they should get the same pay. If they don't get the same pay, then we have injustice in the distribution of resources. So, equity theory. The last motivation theory I want to mention now is the job characteristics model. The job characteristics model says that it's consistent with motivator hygiene theory, but a little bit higher. What it says is that characteristics of the job make us or motivate us. We will tend to work harder and have more effort in jobs that are more interesting, jobs that are constantly changing, jobs that enable us to do more things. So, the characteristics of jobs that seem to matter are the following: skill variety. Jobs that require more different skills will be more motivating to us than jobs that require us to do just the same thing over and over and over again. task identity. Task identity means the job, when my effort into a job can be identified as being from me at the end of the day. So task identity means I can point to a certain project or point to a certain result and say, I did that. The more that you have task identity, the more you can identify the part of a job that came from you, the more motivating. Task significance. You'll have greater motivation for tasks that have an important impact on the firm's performance or on firm operation. The more significant a task is, the more motivating it is to people. Autonomy. People work harder when they have discretion about how, when, where they can complete their jobs. If people are closely supervised and have to come into work and have to, every hour of the day is scripted as to what you can work on, low autonomy, lower motivation. On the other hand, if you give people the ability to come home or otherwise control how they do the job, then higher autonomy, higher motivation. Lastly, feedback. More motivation comes from constant and constructive feedback that tells workers, tells followers how they're doing, and gives indications or gives advice as to how to do it better in the future. So to sum up this slide show, this slide presentation, think about the theories that explain leaders' ability to inspire passion. Not just obedience, but passion. And that's a challenge. I think that a lot of the theories just look at how to influence people, not so much how to connect with the inner needs that drive them. And it's a little more challenging, and it's probably worth thinking about. What's missing from these theories? And I mentioned a few things here. Values. A lot of companies put values in their missions, in their operations. Google's trying to make all kinds of knowledge free and easily available to everybody through the internet. Whole Foods is trying to make the whole world a healthier place by helping us to eat good foods, healthy foods. Working for those companies might be a very invigorating place, a very inspirational place. What role do values have to play here? Expectancy theory mentions this. Interesting to see how that blend can go back in. How about fear? I think as leaders, we can inspire passion and certainly inspire a lot of emotion through fear. And fear of failure, fear of bad result. Fear is very often a motivator, a motivating emotion. And what role does it have to play? And how about emotional intensity? To motivate a follower to be obedient is very different from motivating to be passionate. Lincoln's example, I think, is very useful. How did he motivate so many to give their lives without being like what I would say a preacher? He didn't. He was very ethical, had a lot of integrity, was very values oriented, a preacher in that sense. But he wasn't somebody like a Hitler. I hate to use that example. He wasn't somebody who could offer a screaming, yelling, inspirational speech that would just make everybody at the edge of your seat and follow him to the front line. He didn't really do that. His Gettysburg Address was a short little speech that didn't really make a big impression at the time, yet is timeless in its impact. How did Lincoln do that? It's a lesson to follow. And I guess I'd like to challenge you to apply these theories to your lives and your leadership action. And I'd like to say also, welcome back from Labor Day break. Hope it was productive, and I look forward to future activities in the course.